Welcome into CyHawk Talk here on a Thursday. Special thank you to our friends at Cyclone Fanatic for allowing us to use their studio here in Ankeny as I'm in Ames for the Iowa State Iowa men's and women's basketball games. Fun game from the women last night. Ben and I were there to break it all down on QCtimes.com. We'll talk a little bit about that game later on in today's show, but we want to start it off with the big news in the state of Iowa and why, Ben has had a couple of sleepless nights the last week. He's getting the dad experience like I've had. A little early. He's getting the tutorial, the preview, what it's going to be like when he's got a couple little Ben Juniors running around. And that's because Iowa State has a new head coach, Jimmy Rogers. He was introduced this week. Ben, give us the rundown on everything you learned about Coach Rogers in that press conference and everything you learned about since his hiring 10 seconds after Matt Campbell headed out to Penn State.
10 seconds. It felt like that. I think it was actually 12 minutes. Was the coaching search. Our hot board was up for 12 minutes with candidates to replace Matt Campbell, and Jimmy Rogers seemed to be kind of the handpicked successor that Iowa State had in place before and during Matt Campbell kind of talking with Penn State. Jamie Pollard said they had to run a parallel track, and the result of that parallel track was Jimmy Rogers. I wrote a story, 10 things you should know about Jimmy Rogers, Iowa State's new coach, and I can give you some of them. He played in Jack Trice Stadium in 2008. He's a defensive guy, played linebacker. There was actually some photos of that game. He coached in the lightning delay game. A lot of Iowa State fans remember when South Dakota came to Jack Trice Stadium and lightning disrupted
South Dakota
that game.
State.
The Jackrabbits, South Dakota State. I'm sure Jimmy would not be happy with that.
No.
That's a mistake you can't make. Jimmy's an intense guy, Ethan. He's an intense guy. That's how I would describe him. He said he has RBF. I had to Google what that is, but
come on.
I know. That term didn't get used around the lunch table.
And you're throwing it around last night already.
I was.
Look at that. He's just slipped it into his vocabulary seamlessly.
Jimmy said that's how I always look. I'm an intense guy, and I think we saw some of that intensity about 20 minutes into his Q&A session. He was like, hey, my biggest challenges here are, going and building relationships with these recruits as the transfer portal opens on January 2nd. I need to go in there and start. My player meetings begin at 11:30. Are these questions about done with? He was ready to get on it. So I think we got to see a little bit of that intensity, but also maybe some of the more, relaxed version of himself with making, that joke about what his face looks like all the time and how much of a player's coach I think he strives to be and how much he values relationships and getting to know those guys.
The three things I'm most curious about are, one, does he like the color black? First team meeting, we saw the promo photos from Iowa State. Who's wearing the black gear? So are the black uniforms going to stay around? Two, how bent does he like the brim on his hat? and then three, already escapes me because my first two jokes were so funny.
I laughed. Funny note on that. I actually texted somebody from the operations side of Iowa State football. And, of course, on the Quad City Times, we wrote the big story about what's the deal with Iowa State's black uniforms and how much Iowa State and Matt Campbell embraced that. And I asked this guy, I said, hey, look, before I go to my grave knowing, was that story that I wrote, right in the middle of this season after the BYU game where you guys wore black uniforms, the reason why gold suddenly got reintroduced to the lineup after almost 9 years of being gone? And I was told, no, we were just playing so bad we needed to change it up. So I don't know if Coach Rogers is as superstitious of a uniform guy, but he did wear a black tie in his press conference. So maybe that's a sign.
Maybe he just didn't have time to go out and get a cardinal or gold tie either. That's a possibility as well. What color was his suit jacket?
I think it was gray. It was
okay.
gray.
So he might not have had the right tie to match the occasion, the right colored tie to match the occasion, match the jacket. And he played for South Dakota State, and he they have gold in their color palette as well. So I imagine that it's not going to get.
He could have worn a Washington State colors. That's kind of similar,
Crimson, no. See,
red,
we went over this. We went over
palette?
this last time. I can't believe you're still getting clowned by this. Crimson and Cardinal, not the same color. I guess as we're thinking about how quickly things went with coach, I mentioned 10 seconds. I was sitting down for a bowl of vegetable beef soup, and I get a call from Ben Hutchins saying, "Hey, I need you to type this up for me because they already hired a head coach." And I was like, "Oh, like they're already talking to someone?" It's like, "No, they already hired someone." I'm like, "Oh, okay. I'll let my soup get cold. I'll go write something up real quick."
I appreciate it. I was sitting outside the team facility in 20-degree weather, and my fingers were not working as well as they do when it's indoors in a comfortable 70 degrees. So you were
nor was the hotspot working correctly either.
It was not a very hot spot that day.
So, I type up the Jimmy Rogers news, and then Ben, immediately puts out 10 things to know about Coach Rogers. And, things just were happening fast and furious. And then I see this quote or this comment from AD Pollard saying, Coach Campbell said this isn't going to be about money. So like, don't like that's not going to be a consideration. So Iowa State doesn't make a counter offer on Penn State, or that's what we're led to believe.
Yeah.
And I can't believe that even if that's what Coach Campbell requested, that you wouldn't at least try and beat Penn State's offer to keep the winningest coach in your program's history. It's just unfathomable. And I think if I was an Iowa State fan, I'd be pretty upset about that. I guess walk me through why I shouldn't, like as I put on my Iowa State fan hat today, like why shouldn't I be upset about that?
Sure. So I wasn't in the room when Matt Campbell approached Jamie Pollard and told him, as he's contractually obligated to do, that I'm talking to Penn State. So I don't know. The story we got from Jamie Pollard was that Matt said, don't spend any time or resources trying to put together a counter offer, a keep Matt Campbell in town offer, because this isn't about that. This is about me making a family decision. Pollard shared, on Friday night that there's some health issues going on with Campbell's mom, Erica Campbell's mom. His daughter is going to college in Washington, D.C., which is a little bit closer, if you think about geography, to Penn State. So Campbell cited those reasons, or Pollard cited those reasons. I think in terms of if Pollard was obligated to put together some sort of offer, regardless of what Campbell wished, I mean, maybe. But I think over the course of 10 years here, Pollard had every opportunity to show Matt Campbell why Iowa State was financially invested and financially giving Iowa State the best possible chance to go out and win. I think in terms of, if I look at it like, hey, what does a last second offer show me that your previous 10 years here hasn't already done? I think that's how I look at it. Like, Iowa State already had a chance to show Matt Campbell what kind of level of investment there was in the football program.
So I guess that kind of gets to my next question or my next comment, which would be, it almost feels like Iowa State didn't really have a chance the moment Penn State became interested. And for whatever reason, even though Coach Campbell had declined other big jobs earlier that had shown interest in him or reportedly shown interest, were rumored to have shown interest. You wrote the story about the USC job that he turned down. For whatever reason, it just seemed like Wednesday night when this, the Kalani Sitake didn't work out for Penn State, and they kind of shifted their focus to Matt Campbell because, maybe Josh Pate tipped him off. It just seemed like this one was going to be different from the start. Did you get the sense that this one, I mean, it felt like the way you handled it, because I get to see the back end of how you kind of planned everything out. It kind of seemed like you felt like this one was different.
100%. That's what Pollard said almost verbatim. Pollard said from the get-go, this one felt different. And Pollard, I mean, watch the video if you haven't seen his Friday night press conference yet. It was remarkable. Some of the things he was talking about, he mentioned USC verbatim, like that whole reported thing that everybody kind of knows about, the worst kept secret around. Pollard said, this one felt different from that. In that situation a few years ago, I think that was after the Fiesta Bowl appearance when Lincoln Riley ended up taking that job. But Pollard said he told Matt Campbell then, Matt Campbell, you are not a fit at USC, a Southern California guy, an LA guy. You are not a fit there. That's what Pollard said he told him in that moment. And he said this one felt different from that. This one felt different from, the NFL jobs that Dan McCarney told about. Dan McCarney said to me on Sunday that Matt Campbell has turned down many of these jobs. And there's been interest ever since Iowa State's first appearance in the Big 12 championship game. So I do think there was a sense that this one felt different.
And I just think that you look at it and you evaluate it, and it's like, yeah, I would probably agree with Pollard that he probably wasn't a USC guy. I don't even think Lincoln Riley is necessarily a USC guy. It still feels kind of weird seeing Lincoln Riley in USC gear. Made a lot of sense at Oklahoma. Doesn't make a lot of sense with the Trojans, and it's maybe not working out in the way that either party would have thought it was going to work out in LA for those two. Any final thoughts before we start talking about a little bit of women's hoops and where these two men's basketball teams are at so far in this season?
I have a lot of final thoughts. I mean, we think about, okay, what's the big question now is roster retention and who's coming back. And right now, only a handful of Cyclones, I think it's up to 4, have declared their intention to enter the transfer portal. Of course, you can't officially go in until the second. The most notable name of that bunch is Quentin Taylor Jr., a defensive back who declared on social media that he was entering almost right after the team meeting on Friday at 7 p.m. So you wonder if, maybe he had visions of doing that before any of this ever went down. Anyway, we'll see who enters the portal. To segue into our women's basketball talk, a few notable fans were in Hilton Arena last night. Rocco Becht, Benjamin Bramer, and Caleb Bacon were all in attendance. 2 of those 3 guys made my 5 most valuable players Iowa State needs to retain list. You can read that on the QuadCityTimes.com.
It's been out there for a while. If they're going to read it, they're going to read it. What are the last 2 names?
I said, as kind of a little bit of a surprise, nose tackle Zamir Hawk. And that comes in. He's kind of the only guy who physically fits the Dom Orange mold, and Orange is going to go to the NFL. And I think that's important. When you talk about
you're probably not going to play the same defensive scheme because Haycock kind of runs a unique defensive scheme, right? So maybe does he still have a fit at Iowa State would be my concern for if I'm the NIL agent for Mr. Hawk, or I'm in his inner circle. I'm like, are you going to fit in the new defensive scheme? What do you know what Coach Rogers wants to run on the defensive side of the ball yet?
Gone is the 3-man front at Iowa State. John Haycock's 3-man front, the scheme that so many Cyclone fans have had opinions on, is gone. Jimmy Rogers was very clear in his press conference that he's bringing in a 4-down lineman defensive scheme. He ran it at Washington State. He's run it in the past. That's what he does. He's bringing in personnel to fit that scheme. So he talked about right now on Iowa State's defense, there are too many defensive backs because, that's the scheme that was prioritized here. So that's where Iowa State recruited toward. Rogers said there's going to be attrition to get more defensive linemen in here, which is why I think Zamir Hawk would fit that list, because those guys are going to be at a premium for Iowa State, getting bodies in that defensive line room. And that's a position that's already at a premium in the portal. It's like quarterback and defensive line. Honestly, one of the maybe top paid positions in the portal behind quarterback. So I think retaining that top talent on the defensive front, whether you're an outside, edge rusher or a run fit inside guy, I think isn't going to be at a premium. And Cooper Ebel, linebacker, was one of the other names on that list. Cooper, interesting case there. He's from Iowa. He was the leading tackler this season, and Jimmy Rogers recruited him to play at South Dakota State. So a little bit of a connection there between the old coach and the linebacker. Maybe that is one of the reasons that Cooper Ebel wants to stay around and stay. We'll see.
Obviously, there are going to be some guys too that are Iowa kids that are on the roster that probably had some FCS interest, and they'd had some, South Dakota State recruits the FCS talent of the state of Iowa pretty hard. So I'm sure that when some of those tweener guys that ended up becoming, 3 stars and, flashed and ended up getting that Iowa State offer later in the process, probably had some FCS interest and South Dakota State interest. So I'm sure he's probably a little bit more familiar with the roster than just any Joe Schmo off the street would be for a head coach. So that's probably a little bit of an advantage for going with Jimmy Rogers too. But you kind of stole the segue talking about the 3 fans that were in attendance last night. Iowa State beats Iowa in a battle of top 25 teams, 74-69 in women's hoops. It's the first win since 2021 in the series for the Cyclone women's basketball team. First win for the really important junior class on that roster. And you asked Coach Fenley about, how important is this for this junior class? And, he kind of took that beyond just the junior class. It was probably important for every single player on the roster to get a win over Iowa. Can you speak to that a little bit and what you sensed for how big that win was for the program?
It was. And I saw a video afterward of Audi Crooks hugging Natty Brown, these 2 juniors who, along with junior Ariana Jackson, kind of define this wave of Cyclone women's basketball. And I think Audi said, man, like finally, you could tell as an in-state kid from Algona, Iowa, how much this game, this rivalry, winning on her home court meant to her. It was kind of the the last unchecked box in terms of Audi Crooks' state basketball player legacy as somebody who has set so many records in terms of points and all of those things. Now finally getting the in-state win, I think it was huge. It's kind of a benchmark that you have to look at in terms of what Iowa State's season is. This was maybe the first. It was the first ranked matchup the Cyclones have played this season, and they passed the test. I think it shows you that they are a caliber of a team that has a chance to be in the second weekend at least. Contending for a Sweet 16 Final Four. Even Finley said this matchup felt like a second round game going into the Sweet 16. So just a really big kind of benchmark for the Cyclones to clear. What were your impressions of? It sounded like Jan Jensen to me wasn't too devastated with the result. I thought she was pretty positive.
Yeah, on Tuesday when we talked to her, she's like, I still don't know how good we are as a team. And she said, I think I'm seeing a good thing. So I think she thought she had a good team, but she needed to figure out if she had a great team and a potential Sweet 16 team. And I think what she found out yesterday is, I think we probably do have a team that's capable of getting to the Sweet 16, just like Iowa State's capable of getting to the Sweet 16, because you look at it, Iowa wins the first quarter. They have a 4-point lead, 5-point lead going into the second quarter, ends up battling to a 35-35 tie at halftime. And then, the third quarter we'll discuss later. But then in the fourth quarter, you do enough to get to the point where you're down 3 after trailing by 17 with 43 seconds left in the third quarter. And so you think about that and it's like, if this game's in Carver Hawkeye, maybe Carver Hawkeye is worth 5 points. If this game's in a neutral site location, it's in an Omaha, on the round of 32. I would hope Iowa State and Iowa wouldn't meet in the round of 32, but if they did, if this game's in a neutral site, maybe that's worth 5 points, right? Maybe you don't let the game get away from you in the third quarter, which is also something she talked about on Tuesday. It's like when you're in an environment like Hilton, that can get away from you really fast. And I tweeted it live in the third quarter. I can't remember who hit a 3-pointer. But one of the ISU starters hit a 3 to go up 11 with about 4 minutes left in the third quarter. And I texted you, I'm like, it's over. Like, this game's over. And then it got to be 17 and it just kind of felt like Iowa let the game get away from them right there. And then, it was almost like the break between the third quarter and fourth quarter acted as a timeout and they were able to figure themselves out and switch things up. One of the things that they switched up was Hannah Stolke started guarding Audi Crooks, and Ava Hayden started guarding Addie Brown. And I felt like they had a lot more success on the defensive end, shutting down both of those players who both still ended up with double doubles in points and rebounds. But you could tell Hannah Stolke had played the 5 last year, had guarded Audi Crooks before, kind of knew what she was doing against ISU's best player. And Ava Hayden's athleticism as a center allowed her to kind of shift down and play and be that primary guard on a forward as opposed to being the primary guard on Audi Crooks. Both ended up fouling out. It was just kind of the way the game went. Ava got into foul trouble. That's probably why they made the switch to go from having Ava guard Audi to guarding Addie. But I thought that switch, if they'd done that maybe earlier in the third quarter, could have changed things too, because it just seemed like that was when they had the most success on defense. And so I think it's fair for Coach Jensen to come out of that game pretty positive, because even though they lost and you want the win, she said that, I would have loved to have won, but to play the way that they did, I think says a lot about the team, and you feel pretty positive about them. I think I said it after the first quarter, said it to someone at halftime. I feel better about the Hawkeyes right now than I did this morning. Third quarter, I was like, okay, this is kind of how I expected this game to go. And then back in the fourth quarter, I was like, no, I feel pretty good about the Hawkeyes. And so I don't think we'd be stunned after seeing that game to see them be in the Sweet 16. I'll be really curious to see what happens in 2 weeks when they go play UConn in Brooklyn. I think that'll give you a really good idea of just how high the ceiling can be, because now they know what they need to fix. Now they know what they need to work on. Now they know what a good team's going to exploit about them, and they have 2 weeks to figure it out. They get one game against Lindenwood, who's the preseason favorite to win the Ohio Valley Conference. And then they'll have plenty of practice time and one decent mid-major opponent to figure things out before they go and get like the biggest test of the season. Like, this is probably the number one game on the schedule this year for the Hawkeyes. No disrespect to the Cyclones, but once they figure that out, then it's conference play. And so you'll know exactly how good this team is and how good they can be going into conference play. And then it's just like health and, keeping that consistency will, determine where they end up in terms of seed in the NCAA tournament and Big Ten tournament.
We really got to see last year Iowa State's ceiling kind of lowered as they went to play UConn and South Carolina and got crushed in both of those matchups, which that's a tough opponent, tall task, but we really got to see how limited they were. So I think it'll be a revealing game for, maybe the ceiling of this Iowa team.
Yeah, it was interesting because last year kind of felt like the Iowa loss was kind of the final blow for the Cyclones preseason hype. They had the upset loss to UNI, and then they lose to Iowa, and it just kind of seemed like, well, we thought this was going to be a Sweet 16 team, but now it's like probably not a Sweet 16 team. So it'll be interesting to see how this game affects the loser this year. That will be certainly something I'm keenly watching. Is we get data points for our own coverage of the CyHawk rivalry because obviously these are the first two we've ever covered. So it'll be fun to watch that. I guess as we're looking at the women's basketball thing, how big do you think that this 2-week injury to Beatty is going to be? Coach Fenley discussed it briefly last night.
Yeah, Reese Beatty, the freshman, she's out for 2 weeks with a lingering foot injury, is what we heard, and she's played, I think, like 10 minutes a game and done some really nice things as a freshman. She's a physical player, gets downhill, really provides Iowa State a lot of fluidity in its backcourt with Jada Williams, still continuing to ramp up her minutes. So I think Finley even mentioned last night that, man, Reese Beatty would have been a great player to throw against this Iowa defense because she's able to be physical and, get downhill and really provide them with another option off the bench. So Iowa State, they don't really begin Big 12 play until Christmas time. So they have a little bit of time here for Beatty to get healthy. And I think it showed a lot that Iowa State was able to get Reagan Wilson some minutes, coming off the bench. And they had a little bit more guard depth than they did last season. That's where Iowa State ran into trouble last year, is the guard depth. As Kinsey Hare got hurt and Iowa State, Emily Ryan was playing limited minutes last season. That's what I think really impacted this Iowa State team. So I think a positive sign that they were able to navigate through some of that guard depth and get their best win of the season.
I've also, final thought on the Hawkeyes, talking about kind of the depth a little bit. And I thought that Layla Hayes and Journey Houston played some big minutes last night when Ava Hyden and Hannah Stolke went out, both getting opportunities to guard Audi Crooks and Addie Brown. Those are some big minutes for some freshmen, and they held serve because Iowa was still within 3 points in the final minute of the game. So they did enough to keep it within reach. So those were some big minutes for those two freshmen. And then also the moment of the night, which I'm sure you wrote about it, but Audie and Coach Fenley on the final free throw when she goes to the line, and Coach Fenley points to her and then points up and says, he's watching. I thought that was a really cool moment. Both Coach and Audie talked about how big this rivalry was for their relationships with their respective fathers, both their late fathers, and just to have that really cool moment between coach and player. Audie said she missed the first free throw because she was crying a little bit, and so I thought that was really cool. You did write about it?
I did. It was one of my takeaways. Is why was Audi Crooks so emotional going to the free throw line to potentially ice the game, and she missed the first one, crying, thinking of her late dad, Jimmy, who died in 2021. Jimmy was a big Cyclone fan, and they always watched this rivalry together. And it's kind of a bond and something that Crooks has talked about with Coach Fenley, because Fenley lost his dad 6 years ago today from when we record on Wednesday, December 11th. And 6 years ago, when Fenley lost his dad, he coached in a CyHawk game that day. So this rivalry, this game with all the other things that go into it, it's also a time that really reminds both of, those two pillars of this team about their dad. And so when Fenley, pointed both fingers in the sky and said, he's watching, Audie just lost it. And she even got emotional talking about it after the game. Just an incredible thing that we got to see her kind of work through and play through, and shows you a little bit about the motivations and the things that go into this rivalry that we would have never thought of.
Zoom's telling us we got 10 minutes left, so we better shift our focus to the men's basketball game, which we haven't seen yet, but will be old news by the time that most of you are watching this. So we'll keep it pretty brief and pretty vague, pretty 30,000 foot on the men's basketball teams here.
I expect a great game in Hilton. It's going to be an awesome game, great atmosphere. Both teams are going to play hard. They're going to want it. It's a scrappy, feisty game.
Unless it wasn't a great game, then I definitely expected it to be a blowout. Yeah, no. I think that Iowa State fans probably feel pretty confident going into this one, considering the performances of the two teams in the last 7 days. Big win over Purdue for Iowa State. Pretty notable loss, 19-point loss for Iowa to Michigan State. I don't think that Iowa's going to play as poorly as they did against Michigan State, so I wouldn't be surprised to see this game be a little bit closer than that. But I expect Iowa State to win. I don't think this is going to derail Iowa's season. I don't think this is going to derail the Ben McCollum hype. Honestly, we'll lose by 40. If they lose by 40, it could do some serious damage. But I expect this to be probably a 5-point game going into the fourth quarter. Probably going to end up being in the 10, 12-point win for Iowa State with free throws and probably a couple clutch shots that Iowa State gets in the fourth quarter. But I think that despite this being a really important rivalry matchup, I don't think this game holds a ton of importance in the season for Iowa. What's your take on what this game means for the Cyclones?
Yeah, I mean, the net is already manipulated. TJ Otzelberger already has a 132-point game. He already has a win at number 1 Purdue in that environment that they won by a lot. I don't think this game impacts the seed line all that much because of Iowa State's resume to this point. I mean, it'll help, don't get me wrong, but Iowa State's already manipulated this net in its favor. They're up to number 3 and KenPom number 4 in the AP top 25. But, the emotions, it does mean something, maybe more in terms of your ability to kind of handle this rivalry matchup more than maybe something we're going to be looking back on at the start of March and think, man, this was a game that really impacts the seed line.
I mean, I will provide the caveat that if Iowa wins, I think it's going to be huge.
It means more to the Hawks,
right,
I would think, for sure.
Right. I just expect Iowa to lose, and so that's why I say I don't think this is ultimately going to be a huge game for Iowa. It's not going to make or break them going to the tournament because it's an away game, so it's not going to kill any other metrics or anything like that. And this is something that Coach Jensen talked about, actually talking about the women's game. Like, this isn't a super important game when you analyze, postseason seeding and XYZ, and like, it's not a conference game, so we're not going to lose conference position with a loss here. And so all those things. So like, in the grand scheme of the very sterile way that college basketball is analyzed in February and March, this CyHawk game ultimately doesn't matter a ton. Any more than any other Power 5, Power 6 game that you're going to play. But it can give your team a lot of momentum if you win, because there's a lot of emotion and a lot of personal stakes in this game.
And thank goodness they still play it. When you saw that atmosphere for the women's game last night, that's the best atmosphere we've seen in Hilton Arena for a men's or a women's game this season. Obviously, this matchup means something. TJ's talked about, college basketball is moving toward playing big matchups in neutral sites like Las Vegas at the Players Era and going to these big jamborees to build out your resume. It leaves the fans as losers. This game, when you get your season ticket packages every other year, this is the one you circle. Thank goodness that this game is still played on campuses, because it's awesome. It's so fun to go in that arena. And I'm happy, the fans get to have this experience.
And what we're talking about right now, what we're articulating, is why they don't play UNI and Drake in the men's side anymore. Because I'm talking about how this game has basically no stakes in terms of metrics. The moment you enter that kind of environment against a Q3 team, if you lose, it does have serious ramifications. And that's the calculus. That's that's what these coaches are tabulating, right? And I'm sure, Ben McCollum, knowing what the opportunity to play in Iowa State or Iowa would mean for a Drake having coached there, would love to have brought that back for the people that, cheered for him when he was at Drake. But at the same time, as he said in his introductory press conference, he's going to schedule in a way that best helps his team. And it just doesn't make sense mathematically for them to play UNI and Drake. I wish it would happen, and I'll always advocate and, pound the table for those matchups. But what we're talking about right now is why they're not getting played. And I think it's also the insurance as to why the CyHawk game will always be played, because it's not going to kill your metrics, win or lose, but it's a huge game for personal reasons. It's a huge game for the state, and it's an opportunity to get your team on prime time on Fox Sports 1. The women were on ESPN standalone last night. That was a big game. Mm-hmm. And both Coach Fenley and Coach Jensen talked about how they feel like they moved the needle forward for women's basketball as a whole last night with the way that they played and how fun that game was. And it's going to be the same thing tonight for Iowa and Iowa State. They're not going to, men's basketball isn't necessarily going through the growth process that women's basketball is, but this is going to be a game that college basketball fans across the country want to tune into. And that's something that Bennett Sturtz mentioned yesterday. He's from Missouri. He's not a local kid. He's not an Iowa State fan growing up per se, but he's like, this is a game I would always watch because I loved college basketball. And so I think that's kind of the insurance as to why this game will always be played.
Can't wait.
Can't wait. We'll have all the coverage of the men's basketball game on qctimes.com. Be sure to check out that URL if you're listening to this after Iowa upsets Iowa State tonight. Thanks for watching. We'll be back probably next week sometime. Don't really need any Sunday Rewind shows anymore now that football is not happening. But we'll be back sometime next week for some more men's basketball discussion, some Iowa Bowl discussion. Thanks for watching and be sure to tune in.